The 911 call that kept connecting after the funeral. They buried the phone with him because his mother asked them to. It had been his tool and his diary, the way people keep their whole lives in their pocket now. And in the week between the collision and the service, she said quietly at the kitchen table that she wanted him to have it. The funeral was on a brisk Thursday in late March in a small town along the Skagit River in Washington state, the kind of day that smells like thawed earth and rain on cedar. 2 days later, at 2:18 in the morning, the county's emergency line lit up with his number and the call connected as cleanly as if he were standing outside the dispatch center with a brand new signal. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Keely March was the dispatcher on the board that night. 36. A decade of night shifts wrapped around her bones like a habit she didn't try to quit. She knew the sound of every ringtone the county used, and 3 it no longer trusted. She had trained herself to keep breath even if a voice said there is a gun, or the faraway way people say, I think I'm dying. She kept a knitted cardigan on the back of her chair and 2 photos on the shelf above the console. Her mother standing in front of Diablo Lake with her hair trying to fly away, and a Polaroid of a skinny boy with a chipped front tooth and a smile that looked like a dare. The boy was her younger brother, Finn, 28 in the photo, forever 28 by the time the town paper ran his name above the fold. The collision had been a week before spring turned a corner. Late at a 4-way stop out by the county line, an empty log truck rolling too fast through a fog that made taillights smear into red ribbons. Finn drove a dented Civic with a cracked dashboard and an air freshener shaped like a salmon that had long since given up its scent. He worked night stocking feed at the co-op and mornings on his old guitar, composing pieces called things like Wet Pavement and The First Chanterelle. When the deputy knocked on Keely's door just after dawn that Friday, the word sister felt like a ladder that someone had kicked away. They buried him with the phone on a Tuesday afternoon because the ground needed a day after the last hard freeze. Keely held the thing in her palm before they closed the lid. Old, black, the screen spidered, and the case pocked with drops of white paint from the time they redid the kitchen. She turned it face down, as if giving it privacy inside that last small room, and she did not cry in that second. She saved the crying for the night in her car outside the Safeway lot when the radio played a song he used to send her links to, saying, "Listen to the way the kick drum makes the air behave." So when the board flashed with his number at 2:18 in the morning, when the screen read Finn March Mobile, when the console showed the tower on the hill by bird's view, grabbing his call like a father grabs a child's hand crossing a street, there was a half second where Keely didn't breathe at all. Then she did exactly what training says. She pressed the line open, put her voice in the place it knows, and said calmly, 911, what is your emergency? Silence, which is not always empty. The air bedded itself in her ear. She heard distance, a kind of wet rush the river makes when it is thinking about snowmelt. Under that, a click like someone setting a mug on tile. Her eyes went to the automatic location information and found nothing helpful. The software threw up a circle that could have been half the county. The handset beeped as if someone on the other end had put a thumb over the microphone and removed it. Then a sound arrived that she did not mistake, a short, soft, breathy laugh. The exact one a brother makes when he cannot help but find something funny, even in a room where the air belongs to grief. Keely's free hand had already found the little rosary of buttons around enter that she wore down with steady use. Her thumb wanted the panic of someone else. She kept it from that. She tried again. Can you talk to me? If you can't talk, tap once for yes, twice for no. If you are hurt, I need you to stay on the line. We are here with you. A small sound like wind through fur limbs rode the connection, then static, thin as a hair. The call timer hit 19 seconds, 21, 27. She probed the network with a key command. The number at the top of the screen did not lie, it was his. She sent a ping. The triangle on her map twitched half an inch and then flattened, embarrassed to have moved. The night supervisor, a stout woman named MrBall, who kept cough drops in a coffee mug painted with trout, wheeled her chair closer without rolling over Keely's headset cord. You good. It's his, Keely said, and felt foolish because the board already told them both. She tapped a line into the event note. Caller number displays as deceased subject. Open line, faint audio, possible misdeal from unknown handset, possible pocket dial from transferred number. Because the systems need this kind of vocabulary even when the body wants to type a prayer. The line stayed. The river sound rose and fell with the patience of a thing that had been working since the first melt in these hills. Twice the click. At 42 seconds, a voice so faint that her headphones might have invented it if she hadn't known the exact way it shaped vowels. A whisper before the word, the way he did when he wanted to speak quietly but his breath didn't know the trick yet. Key, he said. Then static erased whatever came next. She did what you do. You keep the line alive and you start the search without pretending you can command the search's heart. She thumbed a hot button that rang the on-call deputy cruising past Lyman. She opened the text box to the Fire District volunteers and wrote a plain message. Open line 911 from cell belonging to Finn March. Please stage at South Skagit Highway and mile marker 12. Listen for any audible cues. She sent it. She kept her voice in that pocket where calm is a bridge other people can cross. If you can hear me, Finn, give me anything, tap, breath, song, whatever you want. I'm here. I've got you. At 1 minute and 9 seconds, the line disconnected itself with the flat little goodbye that handsets make when they are tired of holding grief. MrBallen squeezed Keely's shoulder. Not hard, just where the muscle under the blade flinches when you ask it to admit it's a muscle. Phones glitch, she said. The way you say a thing because you care about the person you are saying it to, not because the sentence is enough. It might be a number that got reassigned too fast. Or a voicemail we don't understand, or the system hiccuping. Eat your granola bar, drink your water. Keely nodded. She typed. She called the carrier and reached a support tech whose voice was young and far away and trying very hard to be the right kind of helpful. He put her on hold while he consulted screens and a script. He came back with words that felt like pebbles. The phone was deactivated the day after the funeral. The SIM wasn't live. The number was in a 30-day limbo before being returned to the pool. No activity on the account, no pings, no nothings. He suggested, gently, that older consoles misreport. She thanked him with the flat politeness you give a person who has done their job thoroughly and still left you in the same room. At 3:31, the line lit again. Same number, same tower, same ring that used to show up when he called from outside the co-op in the rain. She connected. This time, the wind sound was larger, the way a body learns to be a room for weather. She said his name. She said her name, because sometimes that helps even with the living. The whisper arrived again, under a breath that made her think of the cold. Key, he said. Key. What key? Love. Tell me where you are. She could hear MrBallen pinging the deputy, already turning him around toward the bridge at Minkler. She messaged the volunteer fire chief, a man named Boone with a mustache that looked like the map of a meandering creek, and he replied with a thumbs up and the single word rolling because that is how nights with radios and riverbanks work. The whisper came a third time. Key, box. Then the line shook itself off like a dog and was gone. At dawn, she drove home the long way because the short way had too many pieces of memory stuck to it. She slept hard for 90 minutes and woke with the imprint of her headset still on her left ear. She showered and went to her mother's, sat at the table with the fruit bowl and the envelope full of sympathy cards that needed more than thanks in reply. She kept the things she needed to say in her teeth while her mother talked about potato salad and what to do with the clothes in his room. Then she let it out. Simple. His number called, last night, twice. I answered. Her mother's hand did that small pat-pat that says, I hear the pain, but I do not believe the sentence. It's grief, she whispered. It changes the way machines sound. Keely nodded, because there was nothing else to do with that sentence but nod back and put it in a pocket for later. That night, Keely traded shifts so she could be back on at midnight, the board under her hands like a piano that belonged to the county. At 2:16, she said quietly to the room with no one in it but her, don't. And at 2:18, the line lit anyway. The event timer clicked into its 1 to 2 rhythm. She opened the call. The whisper came faster. Key. box, tread. She wrote the words down in block letters out of a reflex that felt like morality. She pushed her chair back an inch. Tread, she said, like stairs, like a step. A new sound crept in around the edge of the river. A hollow drum, regular, light. Keely closed her eyes. She knew that sound. Years of middle-of-the-night responses to houses with basements and water where it didn't belong. Sump pump, she said out loud, not to the caller, not to the room, just to the fact of sound. She typed sump, pump, hum. Then another word arrived under the hum, not from the line, but from inside her own head, wearing the voice of the skinny boy in the Polaroid. Take the old key from the coffee can, sis, the one with the brass coin stuck to it. Box under the stair, third tread up, like we did when the lights went out in storms. She stood before she meant to. Maribel watched her, didn't stop her. Keely put the call on a hold that wasn't a hold and told Boone to swing a truck by her mother's house. She called her mother from the desk that sees everything. Don't be afraid, she said. I'm sending the volunteers to check the basement. Just wait for them. Don't go down alone. Her mother didn't ask why, which is one thing grief teaches. People you love get to make requests without explanation for a while. Boone's rig rolled up with its lights quiet. The volunteers went headfirst into that smell. Every Northwest basement owns bleach and wet and the memory of potatoes stored during years when the family didn't trust the store. Keely stayed on the line with the open nothing, her voice splinted into calm by a profession that forbids hysteria. The pump clicked. The whisper breathed once more and said a word she wasn't ready for. Sorry. Then, softly, don't be mad. Boone's voice arrived on the radio like a chair scraping back. Found it, he said, under the third tread. You want me to read you the note, or you want me to bring it to you? Read, she said, because whatever was going to happen to her lungs if she waited wasn't worth the poetry of paper in hand. Boone read slow, the way you read a recipe from a grandmother's hand. It's written on the back of a co-op receipt. It says, key tape to this in case. Safe deposit at Skagit State. There's a note inside for Key. Don't tell Mom what bank it is because she'll go without you. Tell her to wait. Also, okay, sorry about the dent in your bumper. That last part's got a smile face drawn like a potato. Something in Keely that had been standing on one leg for a week put its foot down. She let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh and wasn't anything else her mother would have recognized over the old landline if she'd been listening. She wrote the words down because the act made them legally alive. The line in her ear hissed a little, as if pleased. Then it went quiet. Morning brought a restless sun and the sort of legal tasks people think the dead should have trained us for. She drove her mother to the bank with the safe deposit vault and the ancient pen on a chain. She presented the letter that the funeral director had told her to keep in her purse. They signed a paper. They went into the room with the little booths. The banker slid the box out and put it down like a ceremony. Inside was a small green notebook with his handwriting, which had always leaned like a boy sitting cross-legged on a sidewalk. For Keely, it said on the first page. Next to it, a business envelope with her mother's name. There was a key on a ring shaped like a mountain that belonged to the old Subaru they used to share, and a folded paper that turned out to be a draft of a song he would never record because the bridge wouldn't come no matter how he tricked it. There was also a receipt for a storage unit in town that she'd asked him about once, and he'd shrugged and said tools while his eyes looked at a point behind her shoulder. He had written her a letter that began with two jokes whose laughter had expired and then got to the part that made her lever open a whole new drawer in herself. I know you'll be the one who makes sense of this stuff if anything happens, he wrote. I know I'm not supposed to say if anything happens like I can see it, but I think about it when I'm out by mile 12 in fog and the log trucks don't think they need me to exist. He told her where to find things and how to say certain facts to their mother in a sequence that would hurt less. He wrote a sentence that came from the middle of his lungs. Don't carry what isn't yours. He signed his name so fast, the last letter looked like a dog's tail. She held the little book while her mother read her envelope. Her mother's face did a new thing, an arrangement Keely hadn't known it could do. She realized, not for the first time, that grief makes a gallery of your expressions, and you have to decide which ones are worth hanging. That night, Keely took herself off the schedule. even though the county hates it when you do that with no notice. She made tea the way their grandmother did, steeped until the spoon stood up if you let it. She sat at the kitchen table with Finn's notebook and a pencil for the words she needed to lay next to his. She wrote the dates like you have to say them out loud, late March, 2021, because numbers felt like bad company. She made a list because doing is a language the body trusts. At 2:18, the phone on the wall rang, the old landline they had kept for storms because cell service sulks here when the rain gets personal. She lifted it with the same hand she used to place IVs when she thought she'd be a nurse. She said hello the way you say hello into a hotel room when you think someone might be in the shower, polite and ready to apologize. Open line, said the part of her that had trained for too long to rest, but it wasn't the emergency board. It was her mother's cousin from Bellingham, voice carrying prayer under its vowels. Keely felt the absurd laugh again and let it go this time. Not tonight, she thought to the air where a river sometimes lived. The calls went quiet for 3 nights after that. She dreamed the sump pump clonked in a steady heartbeat and that the water rose anyway, inching up the metal pole of the washer like it had a plan. She woke with her mouth dry and her eyes open, the way a serviceable person wakes when she has decided she will not let the day surprise her anymore. On the 4th night, the board lit at 1:10, not 2:18. Same number, same tower, same little pang like someone pulling 3 hairs from the back of her neck in the exact way a brother does when he wants you to feel a thing without associating the pain with him. She answered, now less afraid of the fact and more afraid of the day when the board would decide to stop being strange. This time, it wasn't the river. This time, a sound like tires on aggregate eased into her ear. She heard a blinker make an unnecessary music. She heard a rumble her body recognized as the mile-long freight that climbs the grade toward concrete and can be heard everywhere when clouds lay a lid over the valley. She said his name. The whisper didn't come. Instead, a voice she didn't know. Exhausted in that way dispatchers measure, with a ruler, not with pity. Ma'am, the voice said, are you the lady on the other end of this number? This thing called me and it went straight to your board. Keely did a fast thing with her hands that told the recorder to make a second copy. She said her name and her role. The man explained in the way tired men always do, with extra details they do not know are extra. He was a rail worker out past Birdsview, night shift, walking the line with a vest and a can of paint, and a patience that came from a man who had watched 3 friends leave town for no good reason. A phone lying by the ballast lit up bright white as a trout belly and slid a call to 911 before he could decide how to feel. He picked it up because of course he did. He saw the screen read Finn March because whoever the system was had a sense of humor. Where exactly are you, sir? She asked. And he told her the truth, the way only people at 2 in the morning tell you truths. Mile marker 11, point something, run outside of the line, by the old alder that looks like a witch if you give her a hat. She sent Boone with 2 men and headlamps and the desire to leave without needing to talk to anyone. They found the phone in a seam of gravel, half covered by ash from last summer's burn, no SIM, no battery, a thing not alive, and still somehow doing the work a thing does when asked correctly. The railman said he had watched a martin cross the tracks with the authority of a bishop, and that the phone had lit at his feet with no reason. Boone brought it back in an evidence bag, as if that would matter to anyone who keeps a room of labeled bags. Keely set the dead phone on the console like a votive. She stared at it 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and then turned it face down the way she had in the chapel with the roses and the smell of lilies that always go too far. She spoke into the radio to tell the volunteers to go home. She put a note in the event record that read in plain human, found object belonging to decedent, recovered at tracks near mile 11, turned over to family. The calls didn't stop. They thinned. They arrived on days when the river wore fog like a borrowed coat. They brought her directions she did not always want. It called once when she and her mother were at the storage unit with the overhead door that rolled like a prayer. Box on the right, said the whisper after the open line, and the pump hum and the small laugh had passed. Not the one with Christmas lights, other right. The box held the watch their grandfather had worn in the war, and 2 rolls of quarters, and the letter that finished a fight their mother had been carrying with a girl from high school for 30 years without admitting it was heavy. It called once more on an evening in late July, the kind of hot rare to that valley, when heat lies down like a dog everywhere and pants. She was off duty for once, drinking water in long draws with a slice of lime she did not deserve. The board would be in someone else's ear. Still, she felt it. The old wall phone rang, she lifted it. Nothing. Then the faintest corridor of sound, the way a tin can telephone sounds when the string is too long. She stood very still in her kitchen, in a house that still carries their father's shadow even after 2 decades, and she listened. No river, no pump. Someone whistled 3 notes she hadn't heard since they were kids on a porch with a bowl of cherries and sticky hands. The notes meant, "Come in, it's time." Then the line went as tenderly empty as it had ever been. People ask her sometimes when they find out what happens on the night board, whether she believes in ghosts. She says no in the way a person says no to a question that tries to make a movie out of a documentary. She believes in the way the valley holds sound and the way water teaches machines new tricks. She believes in the habits of grief, which include calling you at unreasonable hours and asking you to find objects on shelves you didn't label. She believes in the way certain names carry weight in certain counties and in the way good men hide keys in obvious places because they want the right person to find them without feeling tricked. If you listen for a moral here, you will miss the point and the point will not be angry. It will go on being a point without you. Keely goes to work, she works. She keeps the cardigan on her chair and the photos on the shelf. She answers calls from people who are alive in the cracked ways the living are alive, and she sends help, and sometimes the help is in time, and sometimes it is in time to witness the end of something. She eats her granola bar. She drinks her water. She drives home the long way if the short way tells a story too loudly. She keeps the dead phone in a drawer that sticks a little on humid days. She tells the story to exactly the right number of people and then stops. Some nights the board does the old trick and shows a number the carrier cannot account for and a tower that should be asleep and a location shaped like a shrug. She answers. She says the words she has said more than any words she will ever say. 911. What is your emergency? If all that comes back is a river being a river, she lets the line stay until it learns how to disconnect. If a whisper says key or box or sorry, she says the truth in the voice that has led more people back to themselves than the county will ever know. I've got you. We'll figure it out. When she passes the graveyard on her way to the early shift now and then, she rolls the window down and checks whether the air smells like cut grass and stone or like lilies someone should have watered more recently. She does not say his name out loud there because she knows better. She says it in the car when the freight rolls through the valley and makes the whole county feel like a chest resonating under a singer's hand. She says it in the basement when the pump kicks on and the house remembers last winter. She says it when her mother takes a nap in a chair with sunlight that has fallen asleep with her. And sometimes, when the hills fold the night just right and the board glows a color she cannot forget, the call connects after midnight and after the end of a song and after the last note of a life that learned to close drawers. It connects after the funeral and after the casseroles and after the number has technically stopped being anyone's. The call connects, and a river breathes, and a laugh leans into the wire, and a word that matters knows the way to the one person who will stand still long enough to hear it and then do something small and exact with what she has heard. That is enough. That is all anyone should demand from a story that features a phone and a county and a woman who is good at being awake when most of the world is asleep and at letting go when it is time to let the line go. So, if your phone rings with a number you are certain belongs to someone who has been given over to the ground, do not panic, do not make a shrine, do not go on television. Answer, stand still. Say your name, ask for what it wants. If the only answer is a sound you know, river, pump, train, the kitchen clock arguing with the refrigerator, write down the words anyway. They will lead you to a key you were meant to find, a box you were meant to open, a third tread meant to lift. And when the line empties itself politely, as lines do, put the phone back on its hook and walk the long way to bed. Somewhere far off, a dispatcher you will never meet is saying the same sentence you just said, in the tone that holds a county steady. I've got you. We will figure it out. Then, a light goes dark. The river keeps the beat, the valley sleeps, and doesn't, and goes on. He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He saw it when the wind fell off, and the lake lay down like glass, a sudden stillness that made every shoreline detail stand at attention. The afternoon sun had taken a step toward evening, yellowed and steady, and the north cove of Lake Lanier went calm enough to show the bones under it. He cut his aluminum skiff to idle and drifted toward the pale shoulder of exposed clay. There, not random at all, a run of stone steps pushed up from green water and kept going into nothing the shore could explain, even and true, as if they still believed a front door was waiting at the top. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? This was late September 2022, after a summer of stingy rain and long afternoons when the heat felt like it had signed a lease. The lake sat northeast of Atlanta, a blue map of drowned hills and red clay coves, and that year it had read its gauge and decided to show some of what history had asked it to forget. Foundations revealed themselves like old teeth. The ghostly lanes of a two-lane road slipped out of the murk and pointed nowhere. Between Bald Ridge and the mouth of 6 Mile Creek, a staircase announced itself and waited for a person with the right kind of attention to see it. Riven Kettering had that kind of attention. 38. A carpenter and part-time rescue diver who liked small engines and the honest work of making broken things carry weight again. He lived in a rental off Pilgrim Mill Road with a dog who had taught herself to sleep through sirens. He was not a romantic, not really. He was the kind of man who listened to what a hinge said when it wasn't being looked at. The lake had been a job and a solace for him since he moved down from the foothills of Tennessee a decade earlier, and on afternoons like this one, he took his old skiff out to idle over the drown. The staircase began 3 steps below the surface, pale rectangles set into the clay, then climbed above waterline, slick with algae, where yesterday had touched and left. 12 risers showed drop. They marched up the bank as if they had no intention of stopping, then continued past where stone ended, the air holding their measure with a confidence that made nothing in Riven's head feel quite steady. He nosed the skiff forward until its snub bow made a soft knock against the lowest dry riser. The hull and the stone talked for a second, low and hollow. He stood, keeping knees loose, eyes at a level where you can decide a thing without pretending it's not, pretending you first. The steps were fieldstone set into a poured bed, careful work from when hands were steadier because nothing had asked them to type yet. He could see where the mortar had let go, hairline by hairline, and where a leaf had chosen to become fossil rather than compost. He stepped out. The rock took his weight with a small, agreeable groan. He climbed, counting aloud the way you do when a rhythm wants to prove it's a law. 7, 8, 9. A wet line at his ankles where he had waded the shallow to push the skiff in. 10, 11, 12. He stopped where stone ended. The sidewalls rose one more course and then gave way to air. Ahead of him, nothing. Above him, more nothing. And yet his right foot, when he slid it forward with the caution of a man who had once fallen through a rotten porch and did not intend to audition for that pain again, found resistance. Not stone, not water. Not empty. A density like stretched cloth, like cold-pressed sugar, like a stare that remembered itself and refused to forget just because the lake had been told to be a lake. He drew his foot back, scalp prickling, breath in a pocket he didn't want to open too fast. He looked around to see if anyone else had been presented this joke. No one. In late September, a Tuesday can make a cove your private chapel. Far out, a pontoon boat moved like a floor with music on it. Closer in, a blue heron had made the stump of an old post into a claim. Riven set his palm above the end of the stone into the air where a banister would be if someone had finished the thought. He felt nothing until he pushed a hair past what he thought was safe. Then he felt a boundary, the exact height of a handrail in a code book he could recite. He smiled despite the way his heart had decided to pick up the tempo. Something here hadn't drowned entirely. Something here had decided to keep going up. He does not scare fast, Riven. He is a man who has gotten into dark water at night, kindly, and come back calmer for it. But he respects a place with a memory. He went back down the 12 risers and climbed into the skiff and sat with his hand on the tiller and let the lake tell him if it wanted him to be braver than his grandmother would approve. The wind was a rumor now. On the far shore, a transformer hummed with the stale sweetness of electricity. He turned the motor off and drifted with his fingers brushing the gunwale and felt for the old current under the new. A loon called once out in the main channel, the syllable bending toward a kind of loneliness that doesn't need an audience. Riven looked back at the steps. The air above the 13th riser shimmered, a trick of light or a rule he hadn't been told yet. He swore softly in the old way that buys you permission to try again. He pulled the skiff onto the red bank, tied it off to a scar of root, and went back up the 12. He did what his hands knew to do. He turned a coin on its edge and rolled it along the last stone. When it tipped forward into air, it did not fall. It sat against nothing, as if pressed to a glass he could not see. He slid it forward with one finger and felt it drag over an edge. He slid his boot after it and met a tread that had weight. He put his full foot down and his bones agreed that physics had not been insulted, only invited to a different kind of party. He brought the other foot up. He stood on the 13th step of something that existed without confessing to the eye. He took one more. 14. He stopped. He is not a fool. He turned to look at the lake, which does not care if you find it holy or treacherous, so long as you understand which mood it is in. The cove held its breath. He stepped backward down the 2 air treads with a caution that felt like a prayer you say without agreeing you're saying it. He stood again on stone that had no arguments and breathed the kind of breath that renters of boats make when the motor coughs once and then forgives you. Lake Lanier carries stories the way clay carries footprints. Old towns lie under it, old churches, the ghost lanes of old Federal Road. People will tell you about a stalled truck on a fogged bridge and a handprint on the back window after, about divers who won't go down a second time because they looked through a school of crappie and saw a porch swing move. Some of that is what happens when humans leave water to be the keeper of their history. Some of that is people being lonely and needing their fear to wear a costume. Riven carried none of those stories in the silly way. He carried them the practical way. He knew people had been told their land would drown for the good of cities they would never see, and some of those people had said their names into the bank and put rocks one on another to make the land remember. He went home with the staircase in his notebook and in his knees. He did not say the shape of it to the bartender at the place on Brown's Bridge, who called everybody chief. He did not post a photo because the lake punishes people who turn it into spectacle. He slept badly and woke before his alarm and made coffee meaner than necessary and drove back with a coil of thin rope and a chalk box and the tape measure he used when perfection had to be part of the bill. Morning Lake, blue as breath. The skiff skittered over wind ruffles and slid into the cove willing. He tied a chalk line at the last stone and played it out up the air, marking nothing with blue dust that caught in nothing and hung there like a trick. He laughed once, quietly. He measured riser height with the tape and found consistency that would have made a county inspector nod. He tied a loop in the rope and lowered it down the near face of the steps. The loop sat against an invisible edge and held, not tight, not loose, as if politely told to wait. Half an hour went by that way. Numbers, angles. The carpenter in him building a drawing that would keep his fear inside its lines. When he finished, he sat with his back against the sidewall and let his head find the cool of stone that had learned shade. The world stepped closer. From somewhere he could not triangulate came a sound that reminded him of a bicycle bell rung just once. In politeness, he stood. The sound did not come again. He walked down the 12 and waited on the shoreline while the lake decided whether to ignore him or to grant him more. A woman called from the top of the red bank. Riven looked up. She was tall and rangy, mid-40s, wearing the kind of straw hat that makes a person look like they know how to move in weather. She carried a camera with a strap that had been repaired twice and a notebook bulging with the kind of paper that did not come out of printers. She introduced herself with a grin that answered questions he had not asked. Mara Clary. She ran a small outfit that mapped drowned towns and grave relocations for counties that cared to admit their forgetting. She had a copy of the Army Corps' old charts and a habit of showing up where the lake loaned the present to the past. "I've been told you've got steps," she said, "and that they keep going up." He wanted to ask who had been talking. He wanted not to have his name in a stranger's mouth. But she put her hand on the sidewall like a careful person says hello to an old horse, and the way her face took in what she saw made him feel less alone in his own seeing. He nodded. He told her his name and the number of air treads he'd let himself trust. She whistled low. "Lanier tells on itself every few years," she said, eyes on the shimmer above the 13th. "But I haven't seen it do this. Fieldstone, that would have been a front walk probably. Or the stairs to a porch. You can tell from the way these aren't as steep as church steps. And there would have been a dog who slept halfway up until someone came home at supper." "Everyone says that about any porch," he said, smiling despite himself. "Only because it keeps being true," she said, and laughed like a sound the cove had missed. They measured together, she took photos, he held a stick out over the air risers and watched the end bounce against nothing. They left offerings the old way. He peeled the paper off a peppermint and set it on the third stone step. She untied a strip of blue cloth from her hat and tied it to the root that held his skiff's rope. The lake, if it acknowledged that at all, did not show it. She opened her notebook to a page where she had copied in neat letters the names and dates of households taken when the valley was flooded in the early 1960s. 2 farms had sat on this spur, the Sumter place, the Jory place. Sumter had 5 children and a clean way with fence lines. Jory was famous for a Sunday table and a sour temperament the rest of the week. The county had cut checks and called it a necessity. The stairs could have been either family's. But on the sidewall, low near the 5th riser, they found a mark cut into mortar with a nail or a stubborn penknife. A letter. "J. You think Jory," she said. "Or June," he said. "Or Josephine. Or a boy who didn't get to grow into his handwriting rights, their first initial into any stone that isn't busy." The lake made a small sound against the hull, a shrug. They came back the next day, and the next after that. In the afternoons, teenagers on rental jet skis came doing grammar the water did not admire. In the mornings, a heron watched like a magistrate. Once, a man in a bass boat cut his engine and drifted nearer and asked if the invisible was real or a trick. And when Riven told him the truth, he raised his cap and said, "Well then," and idled away because some facts want to be left alone to keep being facts. On the 5th day, just after noon, when the light loses some of its slant and the lake starts its long exhale toward evening, the air changed. Riven was on the 14th invisible tread, Mara 2 below on stone, the rope tied at his ankle as if that kind of thing would help. He felt a pressure move across his shin like a child's study of a newel post. The hair on his forearms declared a vote. He looked up. Above him, a faint dark line hung in the bright. A lintel, if you wanted to pretend to see one. A line where a door might have decided to sit if it still meant to. He lifted his hand slowly and let it hover. It met resistance at the height where a latch would be if people had followed the same measurements here as they did in town. He pressed a fraction and felt the air give. Not much, not enough to invite him, only enough to say, "I know what you were asking for," and no. He withdrew his hand. He did not try again. He went back down and sat on the 6th stone step and put his elbows on his knees and let his head go heavy in the way of a man who knows the difference between a closed door and an answer. "Not today," Mara said, not unkindly. "Doesn't mean never." A storm ran around the rim of the lake that night and forgot how to come down. The next morning broke clean and noisy, with birds relieved to be right about the Sunday. When they returned to the steps, the peppermint was gone. The strip of cloth whispered against the root when the wind remembered it. On the 4th stone riser, a line had been drawn in the red dust by a finger that had not belonged to wind. 4 short lines, 1 long. The way a person keeps track of days when they are doing a job no one else is counting, they looked at each other like people who have been included in a conversation without earning it. Mara wrote down the marks in that tidy, practical hand. Riven climbed to 14 again and did not press the air where the latch would be. He listened instead. It is an old trick. The more you don't demand to hear, the more willing a place is to say its piece. Somewhere above him, at the end of the invisible run, a sound came faint, almost an opinion. The scrape of a chair, foot against a wooden floor. Once, then a breath, remarkably ordinary, let out by someone who was done with a small effort and is pleased to have finished. He let his knees bend and went back down step by careful step. The county put out a notice, polite as a church lady, asking people not to climb anything that felt like absence. A man from the Corps came by with a clipboard and a caution that did not include humor and told them to rope the place from the bank. They tied a line and left it slack enough to be ignored by whatever needed to come and go. Mara logged coordinates and photographs and the exact color of the lichens on the sidewall. Riven made a drawing of the steps that showed the air ones the way you show trust with dotted lines and a note that says, as found. Word spread anyway. It always does when to leave a thing alone would be the more complicated form of love. A grandmother came and watched from the shade and told her granddaughter a story about the summer her brother rode a bike into a field that is now part of the lake and fell and did not cry, because corn leaves will cut you if you give them. An audience. A man in a Braves cap stood for a long time with his hands in the back pockets of his jeans and didn't tell anyone why his eyes kept the gloss they kept. A boy clapped once and apologized, and then asked if the staircase sounded like anything, and when Riven told him about the scrape and the breath, the boy looked toward the place where a door might be and whispered, "Thank you," like a student to a teacher who has handed out permission slips to freedom. On a Wednesday morning in early October, the lake rose 2 inches. The first stone step went green again. The 12th stayed dry. Riven set his palm to the sidewall as he had begun to do without design and said the names of the months out loud as if they were a key. Mara arrived late, hair in a bandana printed with little cranes, a thermos in one hand and a sheet of onion skin paper in the other, the thin kind that takes pencil and lets the stone's texture come up through. She rubbed the J, the nail-cut letter, and the tally marks. When she lifted the paper, the letter and the lines looked like a message written by someone whose words had to be rationed. She tucked the rubbing into her notebook with a care Riven recognized as kin to prayer. By noon, clouds built into a boast. Mara packed her camera because electric things deserve not to be insulted by weather. Riven untied the rope at his ankle and coiled it with the absent-minded competence of someone who likes ropes for the way they make order out of risk. The air above the 14th step felt different, cooler somehow, denser. He looked up and wanted more than he would have admitted the week before to see something acknowledge him. Not a face, not a figure, an idea. The lake refused. It kept to its rights. Before the storm broke, a small group arrived in silence. Not tourists, not thrill seekers, people in good shoes that did not belong to docks. A woman in a navy blazer, a man whose tie had been loosened by degrees and had stopped at 3, an older woman with a cane that looked like it had been carved by someone who understood trees better than money. They stood on the bank above the line and watched the steps like people watching someone figure skate after having once skated the same routine 3 decades ago and remembering what the body used to hold. The older woman spoke first, to the stone, not to the living. "You kept it," she said. "You stubborn thing. I told them you would." She introduced herself when Riven climbed down to the bank with his curiosity plainly showing. Ada Sumter Jory. Not a marriage, she was quick to clarify, but a habit of names borrowed and kept. Her father had been a Sumter, her mother a Jory by necessity and grievance. She had been 10 when the men from the government came and put stakes on the hill and told her they were measuring to make the river useful. She had been 14 when the kitchen was dismantled and stored in a relative's shed, and the porch chairs were put on a truck without the porch. She had been 15 when the lake finally climbed to the 7th stair and the dogs refused to sleep where they had always slept and had to learn ground new as a dollar. "My granddaddy set those stones," she said, chin lifting toward the steps. He knew the grade by eye. House stood there. She pointed at the air, ran long that way. Kitchen at the back, where mornings were honest. Stairs to the sleeping rooms tucked in right of the door. He told me we build stairs for coming and going and for waiting. That last part is where the world gets the math wrong. She cleared her throat once, a small thing that meant a larger thing had moved through it. My brother wrote his letter J in the mortar before it set, she said, and smiled fully for the first time. He was 5 and mad because he had not been allowed to carry a stone and needed to have done something the porch would remember. They watched the lake together as it considered which forenoon belonged to which afternoon. Mara showed Ada the rubbing, and Ada put her palm on the paper like a hand over a baby's sleeping flank. He stayed mean, she said of Jory, but without any real heat. But he loved that stare. Sat halfway up when he had nothing to do and the weather had nothing to argue about. Played that little bell you keep hearing because he liked the neatness of a sound that stops when you take your finger off it. The storm arrived, they covered what needed covering, the skiff rocked and complained, and then remembered it had been in worse moods and calmed. The rain washed the red dust off the risers and gave them back their gray. The air cooled like a head turning on a pillow to the comfortable side. Ada walked down to the second step and touched it like the forehead of a child with a fever breaking. Enough, she said to the rain, to the year, to the air that had learned to hold treads. In the weeks that followed, the staircase did what durable things do when they decide to belong to more than one story. It kept being itself. The lake rose and smudged the lower steps and then pulled back like a long breath returned. Riven kept coming because he had begun to like the feeling of leaving a place better than he found it by doing nothing but listening the way a well-made chair listens when a tired person sits. Mara wrote a piece for the County Historical Society that began with the sentence, "There are places we drown and places that refuse." Ada came twice more and told the stair her brother's best and worst. And once, on a bright Sunday, when the buzz of outboards sounded like cicadas pretending to be important, she brought a tin of biscuits and left one on the third step because her mother would have called it manners. On a morning in November, the air thin and brisk, frost like pale sugar on shaded clay, Riven came alone. The lake had taken back an inch, the first 2 steps glowed green. He stood at the foot and waited the way you learn to wait when you've been given more than you asked and are smart enough not to get greedy. The wind came off the water and put its fingers through his hair with a familiarity he hadn't earned. Above the 14th tread, the line where a lintel would be shivered and then settled. He put his hand out at the height of a latch and did not press. "Thank you," he said to nothing and to something. He went home and made lunch and fixed a neighbor's sagging cabinet and walked his dog in the long honey of 4 o'clock. He slept that night without the lake climbing the stairs of his thoughts. He dreamed he was sanding a handrail he could not see and woke with the particular ache in his forearm that tells a man he did a good day's work in the world that matters and the one that does not need him but lets him in anyway. If you go out to Lake Lanier on a fall day after a long dry, when the wind has the courtesy to lie down and let the surface polish itself, you can find the cove if you know who to ask and you promise out loud not to bring a ladder. The staircase will be there, stepping up from water into air with the patience of a body that has learned not to argue with time. You can put your boot on the 12th stone and your breath on your rib cage and decide if you will push your foot forward into the space where the 13th waits. If you do, it will hold. Not because wonder owes you, but because someone set a measure here with care, and because sometimes the world keeps an old promise in a new element. Say the year out loud when you find it. 2022. Say the place by its names, Lanier and the valley it drowned. Say the people if you know them. Sumter, Jory. Say the letter on the wall, J. Say the noise a bicycle bell makes when a brother likes attention and the porch has all afternoon. If you leave something, make it small. A ribbon, a peppermint, a finger laid gently in dust to make a line that will blow away with the next weather. Walk back down, let your knees do what they were built to do. Put your hand on the sidewall the way you would on a friend's shoulder when leaving them on their own porch in the dark to listen to the crickets. The staircase will keep going up whether or not your eyes can follow it. It will keep its measure in the air. The lake will rise and cover the lower treads and then fall back and confess again. Boats will hum. Herons will judge. A woman in a straw hat will rub letters onto paper, and a man with a dog who sleeps through sirens will coil rope and listen. And somewhere under the calm skin of the cove, where red clay holds onto everything it can hold, a front door you cannot see will stay shut and not unkindly, practicing the hardest kind of hospitality there is, offering you a way to ascend and a way to wait, and trusting you to know which one belongs to you today. The 911 call that came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static, a breath slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute for memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. Eamon, she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. If you can hear me, give me any sound. The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brant's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning, and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quince Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. Back door, locked, she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. Is someone inside? Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. Cass asleep. Brant's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case Grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. Amen, she said, steady. We're sending them. Stay with me if you can. The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute, 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brant opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. Copy, Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. Proceed. There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm, meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room. Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself, Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, Cass, it's G, it's me. The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. Back door, Park said into his shoulder mic. Locked, now secured. Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns. The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park, She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away, that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, "Whoever called this in has good ears." The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a third time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night. On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took 2 boys and gave back 1, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again, unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wannon. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, "Box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out." She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it, and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all, and still she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. "You have turned into a person who trusts herself." Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked, not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. "I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called," Leora said. "I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later. Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray." Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. "Enough what?" she asked. Back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light and a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin.